Thank you all once again for coming out. I really enjoyed doing this. Hanging out with y'all's a highlight of my week. So, you remember George Foreman? Okay, a few of you do. He's famous for the George Foreman grill. But what really made his name, and hence his commercial, the amount of money he ended up making, was he is one of the few people who beat Mike Tyson in his prime. So for those of you that don't know, Mike Tyson was a powerhouse heavyweight boxer who was believed to be undefeatable until he went up against the likes of George Foreman. So George Foreman, after he was retired from boxing, became a boxing commentator, a sports commentator. And one thing that he claimed, he says, I can tell who's going to win and who's going to lose a match based on how they get in the ring. And you know what? He wasn't 100% right, but he was also far from wrong, that he had an eerily good track record of saying, yeah, this person's going to win the fight. Again, 100% no, but eerily good. And this reminded me of doing couples counseling. Because when I sit down with a couple and they start arguing, I know who's going to win the argument when they start. But I also know who's going to lose the relationship before they start. Okay? So today, one of the reasons why we're talking about emotional martial arts is we're often engaging these emotional martial arts with people we either want to maintain a relationship with over time or through need have to maintain a relationship with over time. And so how do we pay very close attention to how we're fighting these particular emotional fights? How can we come to a mutual victory, especially when we're going to be with this person for a long period of time? A colleague, a boss, an individual that we're working with, a spouse, a child. Right? These emotional martial arts work across contexts. So here's some key takeaways for us today. There are these things we'll describe in detail called natural habits. Natural habits cause all of us to act like jerks sometimes. Something I would like you to struggle with, for some of you this is intuitively obvious, but for some of you I'd like you to struggle with this if it's not obvious. You are the villain in someone's story. And if they were to come to me and say, oh, Dr. D, you know, so-and-so, it's just, oh my gosh, then you're going to sound like a villain. That from their experience, from their point of view, you may have really hurt their feelings. And so maybe you weren't intending to, maybe you did, but all of us are the villain in somebody's story. And the sooner we can get in touch with that, the better we're able to navigate and negotiate interpersonal conflict. Like, for those of you that have listened to my podcast, those of you who have seen me do other lectures, like on the nature of, like, say, good and evil, I don't trust good people. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but bear with me for a minute. That started when I was working in prison, because there were men that I would work with who believed themselves to be the good guys. If somebody's morally convinced that they are right, how easy are they to redirect? How easy is it to encourage them to change their behavior? And the answer is it's not. It's extremely difficult. So good people who convince themselves of their own goodness, write themselves a blank check to engage in whatever atrocity that day because they believe they're the good guys. Okay? And so I found that the men in prison who believed themselves to be the good one were some of the hardest to work with. So when we're engaging in natural habits, we're not aware that we're now part of the jerk squad. We're now part of we're not necessarily unsullied. We got dirt on our hands too. So part of dealing with jerks is dealing with the jerk within, to kind of get in touch with, well, when am I the jerk? Because when you can get in touch with that, it helps you deal with the jerk in others and not take it as personally. One of the things that I'm sure you understand is most of the time when people hurt our feelings, they're not intending to. There's this thing that I try to teach teenagers, this concept, this idea, is the people who hurt your feelings are living much larger in your headspace than the tiny headspace you're living in theirs. Okay, there's this fundamental injustice that when somebody hurts your feelings, and you're going home and you're complaining to your partner, you just ruined your whole day. The person who ruined your day is probably at home eating dinner, not thinking twice. Okay? Sometimes we're the ones who do the hurting, sometimes we're the ones that are hurt. And so dealing with the jerk within can really help. So there are unconscious emotional processes that we can actually learn to modify. We can learn to engage with intentionally. I'll give you some examples of those. And there's several ways to be kind, even to jerks, that can decrease the problem. The famous, the famous analyst, he was contemporaries with Sigmund Freud for a while, but Carl Jung. He once said, the sign of an enlightened mind is one who has transcended praise and blame. Okay, let me say that again. The sign of an enlightened mind is someone who has transcended praise and blame. That when you see that that person's being a jerk, and it's informed by their context, if I understood the context, I would see them as a little less than a jerk, or maybe not a jerk at all. And likewise, when I'm being a jerk, I often have reasons and context. Some of you are familiar with what's called the self-serving bias or the fundamental attribution error. When you're a jerk, it's because you're a bad person. But when I'm a jerk, it's because I was on a bad day, and there's that thing with the kid's teacher, and I'm hangry, and I haven't had lunch, right? And so we're very quick to blame other people without understanding context. When we endeavor to understand context where we can, we start to transcend praise and blame. So I'm a fan of 80s action movies. The original Commando, Predator, RoboCop. This is one of my favorites. It is B grade. Okay, this is an excellent movie for those of you that like bad movies. Okay? So it stars Rutger Hauer, and it's called Blind Fury. It's the blind swordsman. It's Zatoichi for those of you that are fans of Japanese cinema from the 50s and 60s. Okay, so this was inspired by Zatoichi. That you've got a blind swordsman who is put in these very difficult circumstances, and he does his best to overcome. And there's this great line. I just loved it. Resonated with it as a teenager. So the Rutger Hauer character has just fought waves of bad guys, gangsters who are coming at him, and he's fighting with his katana sword that's hidden in his walking stick as a blind man. He's fighting them off. He's bloodied. He's taken a bunch of blows, and he is just exhausted. He's hurting. And then who comes in? Like, you think the fight's over. He's won. For those of you that have played video games, like after the phase 1 of the boss fight, he thinks he's done, and then phase 2 starts, and the really big bad guy walks in. And he is just exhausted. And he heaves a big sigh, and he goes, "Unreasonable people make life so difficult." And then he tries to fight this big bad. Okay? I hope you can resonate with this poor blind swordsman, that unreasonable people make life so difficult. So there are 3 parts of the difficulty. Our reaction to the unreasonable person, what their behavior actually is, and our relationship with them. So our reaction to somebody who's being difficult, the personal issues we have that relate to the emotional response to them. So imagine a scenario where you're working with a colleague and they're complaining about a third colleague. You don't have a problem with that third colleague, but your friend does. And you're kind of scratching your head. Yeah, this third colleague, they can be a little weird or a little annoying sometimes, but what's getting to you? One of the martial arts that you can practice here is really getting in touch with what it is about them that bothers you. When we're upset with other people, they often refer about us we don't like about ourselves. Okay? So if somebody's really impatient and we're upset with them for being impatient, we may be a very patient person, but issues of patience might be salient for us. It might be important for us. And so we often are very sensitive to other people's faults when they remind us of faults that we don't wish we have. Maybe we have and we're aware of it. Maybe we have and we're not aware of it. Or maybe it's faults that we have tried to overcome. So sometimes we bring what are called unconscious doppelgangers with us, and we react to others based on our experience of those who consciously or unconsciously remind us of this person. Because the other part of it is, so an emotional doppelganger, so a doppelganger in mythology, in history, is an entity that can look like any person you know. So these were fey creatures who could impersonate the people that you love, and they would cause no end of mischief and harm by doing so. And so when we carry doppelgangers with us, we often have these, what psychologists call schemas, these ways of looking at the world that have been informed by people in our past. And so therefore, we have that emotional doppelganger, and we're putting it on the face of people around us. For example, I was talking with a colleague the other day, and he was telling me about how much he hates judgmental people. Okay? Anybody catch how judgmental that statement was? Right? Oh, I hate judgmental people. Yeah, there you go. There's your doppelganger. And then we can ask where it comes from. So for him, he was raised in a very authoritarian family where moral virtue and justice were black and white, ironclad, dichotomous, and he was often judged for the slightest failings growing up. And so therefore, he keeps that emotional doppelganger with him when he goes into new relationships. He's often very sensitive to judgmental people, and he gets really judgy about them, right? And so this is a common dynamic that we see. I-15 traffic. Okay, 2 days a week I commute back and forth from Salt Lake. And one of the things that will try your patience is driving in I-15 traffic. Like just over the weekend, my brother was looking at my little car. And he goes, did somebody shoot your car up with BB guns? Because it's a new car. And I said, no, this is I-15 traffic. I've got a side window that's cracked. I've got little BB-sized divots all down the side of my car. And that was driving along the next side of a dump truck in traffic I couldn't get away from. He was spraying gravel all over the place. Okay? And so one of the things I can do is I can be angry with the dump truck driver. He's ruining my nice new car. How dare he murder, death, kill his face off. Or I can go, what is it like for him being a dump truck? Does he have time in his very hard day to pull over, wash all the dirt and everything off, make sure his load is secured? No, he probably doesn't. How often have you cut people off in traffic and you didn't even know that you've done it, right? So one of the things that is a mantra amongst my kids is they'll get cut off in traffic and they'll say, oh, Captain Special's in a hurry. And then when they cut somebody off, they go, I'm Captain Special, okay? Because it's a way that I started practicing out loud with myself when they were little. I'd be driving, yep, damn Captain Special, it looks like, is a way to normalize the context. That we're all doing our best. And sometimes our best isn't very good, but we're all doing our best. So be aware of your emotional doppelgangers and how you put those on other people. You're assuming the person who cut you off in traffic is a jerk. Maybe they're in a hurry. And maybe they're in a hurry for justifiable reasons. Maybe not. You don't know. So it's a lot to ask of people to help them get in touch with what their emotional doppelgangers are. But I challenge you to do that. If you have an issue with the same sort of person over and over again, where does that issue come from? Like my friend has a real strong issue with judgy authoritarian people, and he's working on getting in touch with where that comes from so he's not bringing that doppelganger with him and putting it on other people. So their behavior. There are some people who behave in a way that on average is annoying and frustrating to most people. They do. So one of the things that we get to acknowledge is some people's behavior is problematic. Even if we're in touch with our doppelgangers, even if we know where our frustrations come from, why we're reacting the way we do, some people are jerks, and they consistently act that way. So one of the things that can be helpful is to be specific with yourself about what those behaviors are. For example, in speaking of being villains in other people's stories, one day, I had asked a professor of mine, I'd been a teaching assistant for a year, and I was applying to very competitive graduate programs. And I asked her for a letter of recommendation. And back then, things weren't on computer. I'm so old that this was paper and pencil, where you would walk up to the letter writer, you would have the addressed envelope to the graduate school all filled out with stamps and everything. You would have, paper forms all filled out on your part, and all they had to do was fill out their part, fold it up, put it in the addressed envelope, put it in the mail, right? And so I had 15 applications in my backpack. I had not shown her yet. And I said, Dr. So-and-so, would you please be so kind as to write me a letter of recommendation? And she rocked back in her chair and blanched. She was a redhead lady, pale skin anyway. Somehow she got paler. And she said, Matt, in good conscience, I can't. And I was like, but you've told me I was the best TA you've ever had. And she said, oh, you are. You're extremely competent. But you're the most hostile, aggressive, and monstrous person I've ever met. And I went, sob. I burst into tears in her office. And she goes, don't try to manipulate me with your narcissistic crocodile tears. Okay? And so, I'm so sorry, what have I done? And it was really painful for me to hear. Well, it turns out, later I learned she does this with every one of her male students. That she is consistently seeing men as hostile and monstrous and aggressive, and she will only write letters of recommendation for her female students. And so I was very apologetic. What have I done? But here's the thing. I get how I was feeding her doppelganger. Yeah, she's a jerk. But I also get to look at my doppelganger and how I'm feeding hers. Some people encounter me as imposing. Maybe even some of you in this room. I hope not. I hope you just see me as a big old teddy bear. But some people, because I'm very tall, I'm heavy, I'm outspoken, that some people find that intimidating. And so I was inadvertently feeding her doppelganger. Yeah, she was a jerk about it. By the way, towards the end of our conversation, she did say, hey, look, you're right, you've been very competent, you are the best TI I've ever had. So if you'd give me your packets, the letters of recommendation packets, I'll be sure to write those for you. And I lied. I straight up lied. I said, oh, I didn't bring them with me. So I went home and over the next week printed out like my tier C, like there was my S tier, dream graduate programs, A tier would be really good, B tier acceptable, like C tier, I would only go there if I had no other choice. So I came up with some C tier programs, like the Hollywood Upstairs School of Bovine Cosmetology and Animal Psychotherapy, like those kinds of programs. And so I went the next week and had 3 of those. Well, I was getting interviews to the top programs, but none of those bottom tier programs, I have no idea what she said in the letter, but none of them even requested an interview, okay? So yes, she's a jerk, and this gave me an opportunity to reflect on how am I feeding her doppelganger? Now, I wasn't doing so intentionally, but then I learned from the rest of our working relationship, which was the rest of the year, to be very calm and very quiet around her, because if I was large and outspoken, she would take that as hostility and aggression. So the third part I've already alluded to is our relationship with them. Sometimes the difficulty is due to conflict within the relationship, and that conflict can become habitual. I'll give you some examples. We'll have some case studies here at the end. I'll give you some examples of one supervisor that I've had, but I've had a lot, where I'm stuck at work with this person, and we got in the conflict habit early. And it's really hard to break a relational habit. So one of the things that can happen, and we'll actually give a term to this later in this presentation, is that when we are in a habit with somebody and we try to change that habit, they double down on their efforts. This is one of the things that makes marriage therapy so challenging, is couples get in a habit. And when one is really working hard to change the couple habit, that then informs the other person needing to change their habit too, and habits fight to exist. Okay? Some of you have tried to stop smoking or succeeded. How hard was that? Some of you have tried to learn patience when you've had a history of impatience, right? I used to be very hot-tempered in my youth and took it as a task to learn how to be more even-minded and even-handed. And it was rough. Habits have a way of asserting themselves. And so when you've got 2 or more people in relation, now that increases the difficulty by double. Because now you've got 2 people trying to change habits. And they're feeding one another's habits at the same time. Why do we always argue, you say to your spouse? Because you're in the habit of arguing. And that's 1,001 micro habits that all go into this particular argument. So you've got 1,001 little habits to change. Likewise with a supervisor. Some of you have had that experience where a supervisor gets a bad taste in their mouth about you, and then you respond to that bad taste by trying to be extra helpful or submissive or people please or whatever else, and that only keeps their entrenched perception of you going. And so habits are relational. And by the way, sometimes you just get mad and fight back. So one of the things that is a mantra is it's not about you. Again, back to what I try to teach teenagers. The person who hurt your feelings today is at home sleeping like a baby. You're up at 2 a.m. tossing and turning about that text exchange or that argument or whatever else. The space that we take up in other people's minds is much, much smaller than we think it is. When they respond to us, yes, it can be about us in part. It is also simultaneously about them. This isn't just about me, is a mantra that you can have. And one of the things that jerks are very good at doing is making you think it's all just about you. Because when we're being a jerk, we don't take ownership of our part of it. We put it on someone else. So if they make personal attacks against you, as I said, this is going to be even harder. So Brad Meltzer once said, he was inspired by Stoic philosophy, everyone you meet is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. Be kind always. One of the things that I'm going to argue, and I've argued before, I'm going to keep arguing. Kindness is most meaningful to those who deserve it the least. kindness is most meaningful to those who deserve it the least. That doesn't mean that they'll respond to it and go, oh my gosh, thank you, I was being a jerk and you're being nice to me. No, they may or may not do that. Likely they won't. It's your exercise of kindness is most meaningful in terms of your character and the person you are to those who deserve it the least. So one of the things that we've talked about before is hurt people hurt people. There was a cartoon, I tried to add to this, but I couldn't get a clean enough image offline. And it's a cartoon that's from a Japanese anime. And it's no words, just images. So image 1 shows boss man yelling at junior employee. The next 2 frames, boss man goes home, throwing child in the air, happy, sitting down for dinner. Employee goes home alone in the rain, quietly staring at a cold bowl of noodles, right? Next frame, boss man sleeping like a baby, employee is tossing and turning, okay? One of the things, though, is if you go and continue reading that particular manga, is that boss man was often the one subject when he was coming up in that company. He was the one subject to abuse. He carries that hurt with him. And now he just assumes that it's part of how business is done. People who were hurt people. And people who are currently hurt people. Okay? One of the things that there was an individual here for a while who was wheelchair bound, and because they were nonverbal, many of the caretakers here, many of the professionals working with them didn't know that they were in constant pain. And so it wasn't until a nurse actually caught on that the way this person was sitting in their chair was causing constant pain because their pelvic bones were resting on some of their core nerves. And so they were having really bad sciatic pain, but they couldn't say it. And so that's one of the reasons the particular individual kept lashing out. Is they weren't lashing out because they were intending to be a jerk. They were lashing out because they were in a lot of pain. That can also be true for emotional pain as well. So one of the things that we get to think about is how we are going to be. And compassion is the way. One day, for example, I was a graduate student, and in my youth, it was all about kickboxing, boxing, martial arts were about kicking the other person's butt, right? That was what martial arts were. And I moved in graduate school, I moved into a new housing complex because I was going to be the resident advisor for this whole apartment of married people. So at Texas at Austin, they have dorms full of married people called married student housing. And I was the RA, the resident advisor. And one of my new residents moved in, and he was this tall, handsome, athletic, charming New Zealander. And as he and I start getting to know each other over a little while, we became fast friends. Well, it turned out he was a martial artist, but he was a martial artist from the wimpy, stupid school of martial arts called Aikido. Aikido is a martial arts where they don't teach punches or kicks. They use their opponent's energy against them. And so rather than their goal as to winning by harming the other, their goal is winning by making the fight go away. It's a different philosophy. And so I started teasing him, because I've got a couple inches on him and 50 pounds. I'm like, yeah, I could take you. Aikido, right? It's one of those fake martial arts. It's not even a real one. Like, you don't see people in MMA with Aikido ever winning a fight in MMA. And by the way, this is before MMA was a thing. We'll get to that in a minute. And he goes, okay. And so I teased him about it, because there he is, he's tall, athletic, handsome, very popular with everybody. Felt a little intimidated by him. And so one day he and I were walking back from our weekly Dungeons and Dragons game. And so I just pushed him gently, and he goes, okay, Draper, I love you, but I need to show you what I'm talking about, because this is starting to annoy me, and it's hard to annoy me. But of course, imagine this with a New Zealand accent, of course. And I go, okay, so I square up on him and throw a punch, and he has me on the ground. I'm a big guy. When I hit the ground, it hurts. Okay, so I stand up and go, okay, got lucky. He put me on my butt 4 for 4. Never throwing a punch, never throwing a kick. He let my own energy and gravity beat my butt. Okay? And so I'm scraped up, I'm bruised up, particularly my ego. And I go, okay, what just happened there? And so he breaks down the biomechanics of this particular exchange. And I said, why do you fight this way? He hugs me and says, because even against those you hate, kindness is the way. And then he told me a story that he saved up for college to move to the United States by being a bouncer in strip clubs in Christchurch. And many times when we think of New Zealand, we think of the Hobbit and beautiful mountainous vistas. We don't think of dirty, drungy industrial towns like Christchurch, for those of you that have been there. Sorry for those of you that are Kiwis, Christchurch really went through an economic crisis there for a while. And so this was a really rough town. And he said, one of the things I learned when I'm dealing with outrageous and rowdy people in these strip clubs is all of us can be outrageous and rowdy. It takes the right rowdy group of friends, it takes the right amount of alcohol, and it could be any one of us. So therefore, I would want somebody, when I'm being outrageous in a strip club, to put me out on the street without breaking any of my bones. And so I'm going to be kind to those who I want to break their bones, but kindness is the way. So the same thing with this martial art, and sometimes we will feel taken advantage of. We'll feel like the weak one because they're dominating, they're being aggressive, etc. But how many times, for those of you that are fans of old kung fu movies, when there's the big fight and one samurai sits and kneels and meditates for a while, or the kung fu master does. This is later reflected in Star Wars movies when one of the Jedi will sit and meditate for a few minutes and gather themselves up, because Star Wars, as you know, was informed by old samurai movies. And so this is part of the way of being a master of these emotional martial arts, is kindness is important. Now, I'd like to distinguish kindness from niceness. Because I've noticed locally, people are often nice, but they're not necessarily very kind. Nice is when you are pleasant to someone's face. Oh, bless your heart. Oh, yeah. I understand. I'm going to level conflict and make sure conflict never happens. We're going to speak in civil tones, and if you dare get uncivil, I'm reporting you to the state, right? That it's this way of making sure that everybody's okay right now, but it can also, in some cases, enable problems to persist. Kindness is the behavior we engage in that is better for everybody's welfare in the long run. Okay? Kindness is the behavior we engage in that's better for everybody's welfare in the long run. And one of the things we find is that regional cultures vary in terms of emphasizing nice or kind. For example, here folks are very nice, sometimes kind. Last time I was in New York City, they weren't nice at all, but boy were they kind. For example, we had rented an Uber, and the Uber broke down. The driver's stressed out of his mind. We're blocking traffic in Manhattan, and people are flipping the bird. I'm trying to drive here, what the, And so they're screaming and yelling at us, really upset, as people are getting out of their cars, screaming and yelling at us while helping fix the car. That wasn't nice at all. They were being meanie faces. But they were being very kind in the sense of rather than just blaming and leaving people there, instead they're like venting their frustration, but also helping. They were being kind. They looked out for the welfare of all of us in the long run by being kind. For those of you that raise children in a healthy way, sometimes as parents, you got to be the bad guy. You've got to be kind. No, I'm not letting you stay up until 4 a.m. playing Xbox. It's 10 o'clock, go to bed. You hear the Xbox playing at 1 a.m., it wakes you up. You got to go take the Xbox because it's important for them to get to school the next day. Dad, you're so mean. I am not being nice, but someday you'll learn I am being kind. Okay? And so that's one of the things that's really tough is sussing out what the nice thing is. Lead with nice, but if you got to choose one or the other, be kind. Look out for your welfare and the welfare of the other in the long run. That's the best way to be. By the way, what was really interesting is in the Midwest, we lived in rural Indiana. They were neither nice nor kind. So New York, kind, not necessarily nice, right? Indiana, neither nice nor kind. California, the parts of California I was in recently, pretty nice and kind, more the northern part, right? So it's fun kind of sussing out cultures where you live on whether they emphasize niceness, kindness, or both. Sometimes directness is the kindest response when immediate redirection is required. Sometimes we need to be direct, and it is the most kind thing to do. That doesn't mean we are brutal or blunt. Have you noticed that people just tell it how it is, can never hear it how it is? Okay? And so part of it's delivery. And so that can be a skill that can be practiced, but sometimes just be very direct and to the point. Look, this is what you did, this is what's going on, this is what we need to do to fix it. Let's fix it. Okay? Now, there's sometimes when I've been put in a position with employees or even my own kids, there's this notion where sometimes you got to rebuke somebody, meaning you got to speak to them pretty harshly to redirect them. And then, after they've been redirected, return with more kindness, because you don't want to make them an enemy. But it's still important to do. Like one day, for example, my younger daughter was going through this phase where mom could do nothing right and mom was always wrong. So I'm sitting in my big daddy chair, this great big old overstuffed lazy boy, and I was playing Diablo 3, I think. And I could hear the two of them arguing over my headphones, and it was that loud. And my home is usually a very chill place. There's very few arguments. And so I pull my headphones off just in time to see my daughter snap off at my very kind, sweet wife that drove my wife nuts to the point she whips my daughter around, plants her big thin hand on my daughter's backside. My daughter turns and looks up at her mother and goes, "That's all you got?" Now, before my wife could murder my daughter, I stand right up off my big dad chair and go, "Diamelin!" Right? And she turned 6 shades of white and grounded herself for 3 days. Okay? Because I rarely express that kind of anger at my kids. But that was a needed rebuke. And so after she'd been downstairs for an hour, she fled. And so I went downstairs for a little bit, and she said, "Dad, you just terrified me. I've never heard you speak like this." And I said, "And it terrified me how you're speaking to your mother." And I was playing the tape ahead that if this continues, this could be a lot of contention in our family. So I need to teach you not to do this. So yeah, I was a jerk. And I'm not sorry I was a jerk. But I also would feel sorry if you think I don't love you. And so sometimes I've had to do that with employees. One of the things that those of you in clinical practice know, documentation, documentation, documentation. Okay? And some people will say, "Oh, it's just to cover your backside in case of a lawsuit." Yes, that is very important. But there's another side of it. If the event is not documented, it didn't happen. And so I get an employee complaining that she's not getting paid very much and she's thinking of working for another clinic. And so I sit down with her in supervision and show she's not seen many clients. "Yeah, I have. I saw this client, this client, this client, this client." Where is it? Right? You will not get paid until your documentation is done. And because this documentation is delinquent, you may not get paid on it. Because when we bill an insurance company for this, we're not going to get paid because the documentation is so old. So therefore, you need to learn to do your documentation. "Driver, you're being so mean to me. You're such a jerk." Yes, I am being mean to you. This is what we call a sharp rebuke. Understand you're one of the best therapists I've met, and I'm fighting to keep you. But you will bankrupt us if you keep this up. Okay? You guys get where I'm coming from there? So here are some phrases to learn. Like these are the basic wax on, wax off, paint the fence kind of moves in the emotional martial arts. Memorize these phrases. Let me see if I understand you, and repeat back to them if you're talking to them what they said. Now, if it's in traffic on the freeway, you can't do it, right? I own that. But if it's a face-to-face conversation and they're the ones being the jerk, try to understand them. Okay? Another is if I understand you correctly, and then rephrase it back to them. These phrases point both of you towards a mutual understanding rather than against one another. You can engage in what's called linguistic adaptation to those with whom you are speaking in that particular setting. So one of the things that we've talked about in these meetings is that familial estrangement is at an all-time high in this country. That 30% of adults, when polled in 2024, that's 2024, it's gotten worse since, they report that they avoid family functions or have even blocked and deleted certain family members, if not entire families. 30%. It's never been this high in the country. Now, we have a whole episode deconstructing this in various other formats, but for now, one of the things that happens is people fight with the other person. They're not actually fighting about ideas anymore. They're not fighting about concepts in religion. They're not fighting about concepts in politics. They're fighting the other person. So the other day, I had some of my cousins over, and my cousins are intense people. It's one of the reasons I love them so much. But if they're liberal, they're intensely liberal. And if they're conservative, they're intensely conservative. And so they're coming around our dinner table, and I'm feasting, my love of barbecue. And so I'm feeding them all, and the tension is starting to rise. And so one of the things I taught them, I says, okay, if you guys are going to talk religion and politics, which is a great way to fight, here's some things I want you to do. You will need to use these two phrases or GTFO out of my house. Okay? Get out of my house. And that is, if I understand correctly, and let me understand, make sure I get where you're coming from, practice those phrases. They had a 3-hour-long, intense, wonderful conversation about religion and politics. And they left going, why doesn't this happen? And we should do this more often. And I'm like, because you guys were fighting about an idea and you weren't fighting each other. You were arguing about big moral principles. You weren't attacking the other person. And so sometimes, like when I was throwing punches at my friend Jared, walking back from D&D, and he had to put my butt in the ground, this is a version of doing that, but with the aggression aimed at you. You're making it now about a subject, about the topic at hand. For example, I received a very negative evaluation at work. It caught me off guard. I received a teaching award at a university, and that same semester, I received a negative evaluation from my supervisor. Some of you have had this experience. Wait, how can I be a 10 out of a 10 employee and a 0 out of 10 employee at the same time? I was butthurt, to use the language of my kids. And I felt myself getting really defensive, and I started loading my metaphorical 6 guns of words to fight back against that negative evaluation. But instead, this isn't about me, although it's very much aimed at me. The person aiming it, it's about them. So let me understand where you're coming from, if I hear you correctly, and started validating some of their arguments. Yes, some of my students found me intimidating, and yes, they complained to that department chair, and that is real and valid, and that does happen. And by connecting there, then we could have a conversation about this feedback and what it meant. My negative evaluation did not become positive, but it went from a 0 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10. You guys get where I'm coming from? Because we were connecting about the ideas at hand, not arguing against one another. So, practice listening to understand. This can be very hard, especially when the other person's saying things that you don't like, because they're evaluating you or they're making statements about an individual you work with, etc. Try to really listen to what they're saying. Not your doppelganger screaming, they're saying this thing, right? Don't listen to your doppelganger. Actually try to tune into what is this person saying. That doesn't mean you'll agree with them. But then you'll respond to what they're saying rather than attacking them. Well, you're just wrong, Janine. Okay, and so, okay, if I understand you correctly, this is what you're saying, and this is what's going on. In ancient Hebrew, there's this word sin and this word repent, okay? Because for a minute there, I thought I was going to be a theologian, be one of those fiery preachers. So I took a lot of Bible study classes, particularly biblical history classes. And whereas in Greek, sin is about missing the mark, in Hebrew, it's about turning away. So when you read the Old Testament, they talk about sin, it's about turning away. And that repenting is turning towards. So for some of you who are familiar with Judeo-Christianity, there's this inherent paradox that many of my atheist friends love bringing up in debate, where God will say, I love everybody and I hate sinners. Well, how is that possible? Because sinners are people, and if you love everybody, you're loving sinners. What? It'll burn in a fiery abyss, brimstone, right? Well, here's the thing. When we want people to turn towards that which they've turned away from, we need to see where they're looking and why. When we understand why they're looking at the situation they are, and they get that we get it, then we can slowly begin to present other different points of view. But it's only when they know that we get it can we help them turn their heads. So this solves the paradox. In this particular Judeo culture that wrote this particular scripture, God's upset with you when you turned away from God, and God's happy with you. But if you want to repent, all you got to do is turn towards God. It's that easy, right? It's not this whole rituals and processes and everything else. And so likewise, if you're really turned away and against somebody, a great way to reconcile is turn towards them, even if they're jerks and you don't like them. But at least understanding where they're coming from, what their point of view is. And this can be very hard to do. They will try our patience. So one of the things we get to do is practice responding accurately. There was a student of mine who was really worried because when you're licensing as a therapist here in Utah, and this is true for mental health counseling, psychology, now it's true for social work and marriage and family therapy as well. Your supervisor needs to do direct supervision, meaning they need to either be in the room when you're doing therapy with your client or watch a video recording of you later that day or that week. You guys get where I'm coming from? And this can intimidate the heck out of some trainees. They don't like seeing themselves on tape. The last thing they want is to be evaluated by their supervisor watching one of their tapes. And so I'm sitting down, and this is not intentionally cruel. It happens to be cruel. Some supervisees like it, most don't. When I can, I sit down and watch the tape with the supervisee, and we go over the tape together. Okay? So imagine your boss and supervisor is watching a videotape of your work and real-time commenting on it and pausing and asking you about it. Like some people just said, okay, I was going to be a therapist, I'm out. I'm not going to do that now, right? That's way too much. But one of the things is one of my supervisees really missed a key reflection to meaning. That's where we think we understand the emotion and purpose of the emotion that our client is expressing to us, and she biffed it. She was a mile off. And the client got really cross with her and said, it's not that at all, it's this, and goes on to articulate in very clear terms what the client's experience was. And my supervisees had me pause the tape. She says, I know you probably think I'm just the worst therapist ever and everything else. I go, no, did you see what just happened? You missed the reflection. You were doing your best. You thought you understood where were they coming from and what it meant, and you missed it, and they clarified and then gave you so much more detail, and that provided a really therapeutic line of conversation. I said, this is brilliant therapy. Because sometimes by making little errors when we're trying to understand where somebody is coming from, that puts them in a position of having to clarify, and now we know better what the issue is. This is brilliant. This isn't a problem. So when we're practicing responding, it's okay to miss the mark. And the jerk will be, it's not that, it's this. Great, now you know. So natural language is part of what we need to address. Natural language is our instinctive gut response to what somebody else is saying or doing. It's the first thing that comes to mind. Like, there are these things called KPIs, kills per inch. Is that it? Key performance indicators. Sorry, I like kills per inch better. Old wargaming. Took 50 of your guys in 1 inch of the map. Warhammer. So, one missed KPI, but 4 met. Natural language is to look at the thing that stands out, the missed KPI, the missed goal, and say, what happened? But you know what they just ignored? All the KPIs that were met, all the goals that were met. So 4 A's, 1 F. True story. Me in junior high. Okay, fine. What had happened is we were making little benches in junior high that would support our weight in case we needed to reach the top shelf. Now that was a foreign concept to me. Why would I need a stool to get something off the top shelf? But it was an assignment, so I did it. But unthinkingly, I put my stool on the top shelf of the woodshop class, where poor Mr. Marbles couldn't reach it. I didn't even think about that. So I see my report card, I've got A in English and math and history and everything else, and then an F in woodshop. And so the immediate response from my dad was, what's with the F? Now, to my father's credit, he was laughing his head off at the time. You failed woodshop? Right? But it was that natural response. Our eyes are attuned to that which stands out. So for those of you that paint, like watercolor, pastel, those of you who are photographers, you know the eye is drawn to that which stands out in the image because it's different from the rest of the image. So if you imagine somebody very carefully laying down and there's the sunlight peeking up between the hills and it's illuminating a hummingbird who's dipping for some nectar in a flower, where the eye will be drawn is all of that light in contrast to all of that shadow. Our minds go to what stands out and what is different. So, blaming language is perfectly natural. Well, this is why you're wrong. You're stupid if you believe this. You're evil if you believe that. You're like Hitler and his crew because you think this, right? Blaming language is very natural, as is ordering language. Hey, look, you need to calm down. That's a guarantee way to fire somebody up, right? Because all of this is natural language. Well, when we engage in natural language, so do they. Punch for punch, kick for kick, blow for blow. And next thing you know, war commences. So when we're angry, our forebrain is inhibited. This is rational thought. Our forebrain is inhibited. The midbrain here becomes more activated. This is the emotional processing centers of our brain. So one of the things that happens is we reduce our capacity to offer reasonable, kind, and nice responses. So if someone manages to upset us, we've lost. Okay? This is really hard because it's so easy to get upset, especially when the issues at hand hit so close to home for us. So we often resort to natural language. A trick is learning to go quiet inside. So one of the things I learned practicing boxing, kickboxing in high school and college is that I'm not a good fighter. I'm a far better lover than I'm a fighter. Give me a lazy boy and donuts and a nice warm I'm like a giant hobbit. I've even got furry feet. You know what I mean? Just live good soil, good comfort, good company. Yes, I hit like a truck, and yes, I can take a blow, but I'm extremely slow. All my prize fighting dreams went away early college, right? But I learned I was a good teacher. And I also learned that George Foreman was right. If I'm working with one of my boys, I didn't have the opportunity to train any women in boxing, but if I'm working with one of my boys and it's before a fight, I know in the locker room whether they've lost. See, what happens is when we're stressed out, our sympathetic nervous system comes online. That's the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint part of our nervous system. It's this part of our nervous system. And it's trying to keep us alive. The thing is our nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system floods our bodies with cortisol. Cortisol is great in short bursts, like once you're actually in the ring. But it's simultaneously draining your gas tank insofar as you've got a lot of cortisol in your system. And if that happens for too long, like for days and weeks, you suffer a condition called adrenal fatigue, where you can never seem to ever get on top of your stress. And every little molehill that comes at you feels like a mountain. You may be suffering from adrenal fatigue at that point. But if I'm working with one of my guys in the locker room and he's already freaking out about the fight, he's lost. The boxer comes in and goes, yeah, I'm going to do my best. You know what I mean? They're quiet inside. Their sympathetic nervous system is not activated until the first punch is thrown. They're more likely to put in a good fight, if not win. But I knew so often that George Foreman was right. I'm sitting with my boy. We're in the locker room. He's freaked out. He's already lost the fight. Okay? So learning to go quiet inside, is a valuable life skill. Doesn't matter if you're dealing with jerks, whether or not you're boxing, but learning to go quiet inside, and it is a hard skill to master. Okay, so we'll talk about some techniques here in just a second. Starting with the first one. The first step is recognizing how you feel. I feel angry. I feel frustrated. I feel hopeless. I feel happy. On those rare occasions you like jerks. Okay? Oftentimes your feelings will be layered. I feel angry and I feel hopeless. I feel angry and I feel sad. I feel sad and I feel hopeless, right? There's lots of different feelings that can happen in cluster. But try to get good at and try to practice just looking at yourself and going, okay, how do I feel in this situation? Step 2 then is accepting it. Isn't that weird? That accepting anger is part of knowing what to do with anger? See, for those of you that get angry dealing with jerks, which I think is the most common and important response, anger is the emotion of change. And it really worries me when I'm hanging out with people who come from cultures that pathologize anger. You should never be angry. Sometimes they say angrily, without a trace of irony in their voices. That's a problem. Anger can actually be very powerful to change a situation in a relationship. But if we're lashing out with wrath, we're lashing out with hate, okay, yes, that's a problem. But anger is the emotion of change. And so if we can accept that I'm angry, oh, yes, I feel angry about this. And I accept that I feel angry, now you get to use the anger productively. So, second step, as I said, is accepting how you feel. Third step is using the energy of the emotion to respond with civility to incivility. So incivility is when somebody's being rude. Civil is when you're being polite. And part of the way to emphasize kindness over niceness is to remain polite. Right? Whereas niceness is placating, oh, bless your heart, dear. Yes, you're screaming for a donut even though you're diabetic. Let me go get it for you, sweetheart. That's nice. It can be very enabling and even toxic. Okay? Kindness is, you're screaming for a donut. No, you're not getting a donut. And I'm going to remain very polite with you, even if I have to be firmly polite with you, because this is a better way than lashing out. So when we're offensive, that actually gives them the opportunity to escape our correction. Like, I had a supervisor back when I was in high school. I worked for an electrical contracting firm, and what my job was reaching up inside metal light poles to thread wire. And we would have to wear these heavy leather sleeves because the machinists who made the light poles didn't sand off the burrs on the inside, but that's where we'd have to reach. So there are all these razor sharp burrs. And I worked very slow. Intellectually, I may work very fast, but physically, I've always worked slow. When we were working farms as a kid, I can't tell you how many times I was grounded. I work slow. I'm good, but I'm slow. And so I'm pulling wire. My supervisor's getting angry and angry. And I knew that if I could get him to lose his crap at me and just blow up, I now had the upper hand, because then I could show how unreasonable and bad he was being. Right? Some of you, your kids may have played this card on you. Like when you finally lose your crap at your kid's like, oh, I got you now. You're now being unreasonable. I can take the high road. Woohoo! Right? So it happens with employees, colleagues, spouses, everything else. And so they escape our correction. And I'm so upset because this particular supervisor of mine, now somebody I dearly respect and admire, was redirected by the company owner. Draper's got you. You keep falling for it. He aggravates you. You blow up at him, and now he's got the upper hand. Stay calm. Give him clear instruction. Give him clear goals. Write him up when he doesn't meet the goals. Darn it. The supervisor's name, Vern. You guys remember? Hey, Vern. Right, it's that name, Vern. Different person, of course, but Vern. And Vern got really good at supervising me. I actually got better because he wouldn't let me aggravate him into blowing up at me anymore. Dang it. So I suffered his righteous correction. Because he'd be like, no, you are failing. You're 15 units behind the next slowest person. We got to speed you up. Okay, fourth step is Stoicism. I'm a little bit worried about the modern interpretation of Stoic philosophy. Stoic philosophy is how to behave virtuously in an unvirtuous world. How to lead virtuously, how to follow virtuously in a world that will pull you into less than nice, kind behavior. Now it's how to master yourself emotionally to control others. That's not actually where Stoicism came from. And I'm worried when I see these quotes online. Join my class and I'll help you be a stronger alpha male, but through Stoicism. I'm like, no, the Stoic philosophers would be how to be a virtuous man through Stoicism. How to be kinder, more compassionate, stronger in the face of adversity. So just a tangent there. A great way to practice Stoicism is to liberate yourself from the outcome of an event. Okay, to free yourself from the outcome of an event. Oftentimes, especially for those of you that are supervisors, you got to write up an employee. You have all these fears about how this conversation will go, and you're worried and hopeful for a particular event. When you go in with an open mind, where you're endeavoring to be nice, kind, and civil, you're practicing some of your self-mastery skills we'll get into in a second, and you approach them, and you're open to how that conversation will turn out, it will be less stressful for all involved. Liberate yourself from the outcome of this. Imagine, for example, with a couple. Honey, you're leaving your socks on the floor again. Desired outcome. I'm so sorry, my beloved. I know I keep doing this. Let me clean up my socks. Oh, and I'll wash the dishes as well. Right? Actual response. After the day I've had, you're coming at me. Rah, 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 right? It's exhausting. So when we say, please pick up your socks, liberate yourself from the outcome of that, and you're less likely to escalate the violence in the conversation. So try to look at the situation from the perspective of those you are critiquing and feel critiqued by. As I said, back to that professor who goes, I can't write you a letter of recommendation. You're one of the most hostile, aggressive, monstrous people I've ever met. She was only 50% wrong, depending on your point of view. Yes, I'm not aggressive. Yes, I'm not hostile. But I am intimidating and imposing. Like this bore fruit later. So I ran a little clinical practice out of my office at Utah Valley University there for a while. And I remember stepping outside my door and I was meeting with a new client. It was a referral from a former friend. And this young lady looks at me and she down-ups me. She starts at my toes, goes all the way up like this to my face, and then she made this most delightful noise. It went like this, ah! And she sprinted. Okay? See, I'm not doing anything aggressive or hostile to her. But she brought some doppelgangers to play, which are understandable, that frequently happen when you're my size. And that is, oh my gosh, this guy could step on me and kill me. Right? Not that I would. But she was terrified. Later she sent me an email saying, I'm so sorry I ran like that. This is obviously not a good fit. And I said, I got you, girl. Here's 3 referrals to some friends of mine. I did not say who are much shorter than me and female. Okay? So sometimes we feel critiqued or attacked by somebody, but even the jerk might have a seed of truth to it that we'll miss if we throw all our walls and defenses up. If we liberate ourselves from the outcome of the conversation, it allows us to weigh, sift, and sort about what the person who's being a jerk to us is saying. Sometimes it might be something helpful. Sometimes, unfortunately, it isn't. So Evolutionarily speaking, our bears have changed. We've touched on this before by way of review. To our genetic ancestors, your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, encountering a bear in the woods was terrifying. Okay, today, going in for a meeting with your honorary supervisor is terrifying. If you encountered a bear in the woods, you'd be like, oh, is that a bear? You wouldn't even know how to respond, right? Our bears have changed. Because right now, my life is not contingent upon encountering a bear in the woods. I'm not in the woods very often. Instead, I'm in the interpersonal woods of being employed and employing people. That's the dark woods I'm in now. So therefore, what's going to kill me isn't the bears. It's if my business goes under or if my boss fires me. Things like that, right? Our bears have changed, and therefore what our stress response to has changed. So the other day, I was driving through Springville, and this guy in a big pickup truck pulled in front of me, appropriately, used his signal and everything, wasn't being a jerk. But he had this big vinyl in the back of his window that said, "But did you die?" And that's like something my grandparents would say. "Oh, it's not that stressful. Did you die?" And I can remember looking at my grandfather and saying, "No, but I wish it did." And I meant it. Our bears have changed. Like, you can't hit me with this argument. Well, is your supervisor really a tiger who's going to rend and tear you? I'd rather fight the tiger. Okay? Our bears have changed. If the tiger tears me apart, modern medicine might save my life. But if this meeting with my supervisor doesn't go well because I'm catastrophizing right now, I'm stressed out of my mind, if that goes poorly, I'm unemployed, next thing homeless, and then dead. Right? Our bears have changed. And so that's something, if we can really wrap our heads around, validate the stress that we get through this interpersonal conflict. We're not like my fifth great grandmother. They lived in a little mud hut in Draper, Utah, one of the first Caucasian settlers there. And she's trying to harrow the ground with this little iron wheel with a little blade behind it by hand, 9 months pregnant, and has to keep a cap-lock rifle on her because there are raiders coming up and down the Wasatch Front. And so living in terror, and she gave birth in the middle of that mud field, you know what I mean? Well, dry dirt, Utah's a desert. But it's one where our bears have changed. We don't have those bears anymore here. And so therefore, what our stress responds to is different than it was then. So our autonomic nervous system has two parts. Sympathetic. This is a very quick reaction, and it's a thoracic up. So our sympathetic nervous system actually doesn't start in the head. So when somebody tries to tell you, well, you just need to think about this clearly, we react emotionally first. That's what makes this martial art so incredibly challenging. We usually, 99% of the time, lead emotionally rather than cognitively. Because our fight or flight response wants to skip us stepping back and going, is that a mean bear or a nice bear? I'm going to watch it for a minute as it's charging towards me growling. Does its fur match its claws? No. Our sympathetic nervous system needs to keep us alive. It doesn't deal with the brain at all. It goes immediately to fight, flight, panic mode, right? It doesn't have time for the brain to process through. So this is important to remember. Going quiet inside is hard because oftentimes we're already flared up, and it's not us thinking rationally, it's our body viscerally responding. So the parasympathetic nervous system is midbrain down. That's the rest and digest, right? Calm down, everything's okay. When the sympathetic nervous system is activated, it suppresses the parasympathetic nervous system. When the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, it suppresses the sympathetic nervous system. And so the trick is to do your best to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. There are many techniques we use to do that. One of the famous things is breathing. So much so that when I'm trying to teach my clients, like, yes, people have told me from all my life, I just need to breathe. I said, but are you breathing in a way that actually activates your parasympathetic nervous system? There's sympathetic nervous system breathing. There's the opposite kind of breathing. Sympathetic nervous system breathing is where you really fill yourself full of heat. Some of you are familiar with Wim Hof and the Wim Hof breathing method. This is a guy who can climb a snowy mountain wearing nothing but shorts and come back without frostbite, right? He's broken all sorts of cold endurance records. They keep testing him. He's not abnormal genetically. What he does is he does sympathetic nervous. This is where you take a really intense long inhale and a short exhale, right? You're really hyping yourself up. Parasympathetic nervous system breathing is the opposite. It's a deep inhale with a long, slow exhale. One of my offices is on the third floor of one of the Silicon Slopes buildings. And many of my clients will walk up from the first floor to visit with me. And they'll sit down and they're very apologetic. I'm so far out of shape. And they're huffing and puffing. And I go, hey, let's try a little breathing exercise together. And we take a nice deep inhale, but a long, slow exhale. And when they practice that, their breathing recovery goes back to baseline very quickly, meaning they're not huffing and puffing for 20 minutes trying to catch their breath. It's usually 3 to 5 minutes. That's parasympathetic nervous system breathing. Okay? So one of the things that I'd like you to practice, and do this at night, in your bed, waiting for the bus, wherever you are, nice long deep exhale, and a nice nice deep inhale, nice long slow exhale. Make sure that your exhale is longer than your inhale. And so when I'm saying, hey, let's breathe for a minute, I'm not doing, right? That's just going to hype you up even more. Instead, long, slow exhale. In fact, there is a game that I actually teach when we do breathwork classes called the breathing game, where in 20 minutes of practicing breathing, how long can you get your exhale to be without straining? Some students, they start the class and they've got a 5-6 second exhale, and by the end of the class, they have a 30-second exhale. Okay? The guy who taught me this breathing exercise, Mike, may you rest in peace, had a 60-second exhale. You can master this kind of breathing. Okay? So, the goal is not to be in competition with other people or to strain. If you're straining, going 17, 18, 19, 20, you've just ramped your sympathetic nervous system back up. So the secret is to do it comfortably, like you're stretching, not like you're hurting yourself or straining yourself. Okay? So if I say breathe, that's what I mean. I mean not Wim Hof breathing. I'm going to make it at the top of this mountain. I mean rest and digest breathing. Long, slow exhale. So again, the parasympathetic is midbrain down. It is slow. The sympathetic nervous system is evolved to respond immediately. The parasympathetic nervous system takes time to come online. So when I say breathe, I don't just mean go to your office for 5 minutes and breathe. I mean, go to your office and breathe for an hour. You know what I mean? The parasympathetic nervous system doesn't keep us alive in the short run. It keeps us alive in the long run. It's got days to figure this out, whereas the sympathetic nervous system responds immediately to crises. It has milliseconds to solve problems. The parasympathetic nervous system has hours or days. So it tends to be very patient. A little bit like trying to get a mule on the path, right? Come on, parasympathetic nervous system, I'm counting on you, buddy. And it's eating grass. I got all the time in the world. And so it can be a little bit to coax our parasympathetic nervous system online. So the other thing I'd like to say is it's okay. Like I've had various people come up to me and say, Draper, why are you so good at crucial conversations? It must be so easy for you. Okay, I'm going to let out a dirty secret about myself. I hate having crucial conversations. I'm good at it because I know they're hard. They're hard for me and they're hard for the person I'm having the conversation with. Because they're hard, that allows me to remain sympathetic, play on words, with the person that I'm talking to. Okay? They're stressed out, I'm stressed out. I get to acknowledge that, hey, this conversation's pretty stressful. You know you're months behind on your paperwork, you're not getting paid. We need to talk about this. You're not going to be wrestling in the mud for a minute. Okay? We're both stressed out. It's okay. Hard conversations are hard. This does not mean that there's something wrong with you or them. What is hard for you will be hard for many people, but not necessarily everyone. I had one supervisor who really got off on crucial conversations. It was a way for her to wield power and feel like she was in charge. Not the best leader I've had. Most competent leaders struggle with crucial conversations. That's why they take classes that people like me come and teach them. Okay, let's practice crucial conversations, because they're hard. Now, I appreciate that hard conversations for them may not be stressful for you and vice versa. That sometimes there's a mismatch. But most of the time, crucial conversations, when we measure the basal stress levels of the participants, it's higher than they were before they knew the crucial conversation was coming. So their heart rates are greater, their O2 saturation is a little bit lower, things like that. Utilize your sympathetic deactivations before the hard conversation, if you can during the hard conversation, and if you can after the hard conversation, presuming your situation allows it. Breathing. We've already talked about that a little bit. Like there's a simple breathing exercise to help treat the symptoms of insomnia. You notice I didn't say treat insomnia. It's a breathing exercise that you can do, again, like the breathing game with the long, slow exhale, is you count the inhale on odd numbers and count your exhale on even numbers, and you just make them nice, long, slow, even breaths. Breathe in 1, breathe out 2, breathe in 3, breathe out 4, at your natural deep breathing rhythm. And keep focusing on the numbers. Sometimes words will pop in. Great, then you go 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. You don't give room for those thoughts to pop in. So when I'm teaching this to some of my students and clients, they go, but I didn't sleep any better last night, Draper. And I said, yeah, but I noticed you're much livelier today. When we're doing meditative type breathing, it's 2/3 as good as sleep in terms of how we function the next day emotionally and cognitively. So even if they're not sleeping, they're doing something that's 2/3 as good as sleep. Likewise, sometimes when we're stressed out, we've had a crucial conversation, we go to the office, we're practicing the in and out, 1, 1, 1, 1, out, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, in, right? We fall asleep, right? We crash. Now the parasympathetic's back on the trail. The mule's done eating grass, right? Great. It's not necessarily a problem unless you have a very high need for productivity that day. Another thing is mindfulness. This isn't about me. I wonder what's going on with them. Checking in with how your body's responding, check in with your environment, check in with them, ask if I understand you correctly, right? Vasovagal release. So these are exercises that you can do, and I think I have time that we get to practice one. And this one brings on the giggles. I think this one's a lot of fun. So when we're giggling, that also helps activate our parasympathetic nervous system. So your vagus nerve goes from your midbrain all the way down through your core, and it's the one that informs what's going on with a lot of your internal organs. It's a weird nerve because it's outside your spinal cord. Okay? So that's one that our sympathetic nervous system relies on heavily because it doesn't have to go through all the processing of the brain and spinal cord. Just boom, visceral, meaning gut level response. So what a vasovagal, this is just one exercise of many. So in the interest of time, we'll just go over this one. What you do is you take a deep breath in and you press your tongue against the back of your throat and do your Kegel muscles at the same time. Some of you are saying, Draper, I'm a man. I don't have Kegel muscles. Yes, you do. Okay? So how you activate your Kegel muscles is by clenching your sphincters down in your nether region, like you're cutting off pee or something else, while pressing your tongue against the back of your throat. You hold that, you take a deep breath, hold that on both ends for just a few seconds, and then take a long, slow exhale. Okay? This will bring you the giggles. Ready? We're going to try it on 3. So, take a deep breath in, clench both ends, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, release. Right? Do it again. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3. You do that over and over again, and that kicks the parasympathetic mule back on the trail again. Okay? And so I walked by a colleague's office and she was giggling. She'd just gotten off the phone with an angry parent. I'm like, what you giggling about? She says, I'm pressing my tongue in the back and doing Kegel exercises at the same time. Of course I'm giggling. And I said, but what's your stress level at? She goes, lower. These aren't magical potions that are going to do away with all your stress. The goal here isn't to bring your stress from 100 to 0. It's to bring your stress from 100 to 80 or 70, or if we're lucky, 50. Okay? So, endeavoring to set the conversation down and move on. There's this, for example, Lao Tzu challenges us in the Tao Te Ching, from one thing, learn 10,000 things. From one story, take 10,000 lessons. So here's a story. 2 monks have taken a vow of celibacy, radical chastity, and a vow of silence, meaning celibacy, chastity, they will never marry, never have sex, and not even affiliate with women. Okay? Silence, they will not speak a word. Well, the abbot of the monastery comes to them and says, our monastery across the country needs your help. They are understaffed, underserved. Go serve them. Both monks nod, vow of silence, and the next day they set out on a journey. About halfway through, they come to the great river that divides the country, and it is pouring down rain, and the river is swollen and has washed out the bridge. There is a courtesan, a high-class escort in modern language, standing on their side of the river, and she is trembling under her umbrella. She has boxes around her full of her silks and fineries, the tools of her trade, if you will. And if they get wet, they'll get ruined. And so she is trembling in the cold, and she sees these 2 monks, and she's not living the kind of life monks approve of. So she sits in silence. After a little while, the rain subsides, but the bridge has been washed out. The older monk, without a word, goes over, scoops the young lady up, holds her chest height, fords with great effort the swollen river, sets her down on the other side, and then goes and retrieves every box of her finery. The younger monk, shocked and appalled, fords the river, and they walk together towards the new monastery in silence. An hour later, the younger monk turns to the older monk and says, "How dare you defile yourself by touching the flesh of woman? How dare you violate the standards of our order? I cannot believe what you are doing." The older monk says to the younger monk, "I set her down an hour ago. Why do you carry her? Let's proceed in silence," and continues to walk. How often do we carry a fight after it happened? One of the things I would like you all to practice is when you're stressed out about a crucial conversation you've had or has been inflicted upon you, to remind yourself, I'm not in that right now. My mind is trying to save me from future stress. Thank you, mind. There are no bears charging at me. My supervisor isn't here, or my kid's gone to bed. My spouse is somewhere else. I'm okay. Right now, I'm sitting in this space. I'm safe. Everything's fine. And you may find yourself having to do that over and over and over again. But once you master the skill, it gets shorter and shorter. Unfortunately, it never reaches zero, or at least it hasn't for me. But it does get shorter. Now, speaking of mixed martial arts, you guys will drive around and you'll see Gracie Barra jiu-jitsu schools. The Gracie brothers. For those of you that know your history of mixed martial arts, they came on the scene and the Gracie boys dominated MMA. And they did so through a technique called the mount position. This is where they would get their opponents flat on their back. The Gracie boys would wrap their arms around their opponent's arms and wrap their legs around their opponent's legs, and so their opponents couldn't get leverage and couldn't hit and couldn't stand up. And because they had rendered their opponent helpless, they would win the match. So one day, for example, a good friend of mine, he had left our boxing kickboxing school and had gone and gotten a black belt in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And he comes back and he said, "I can kick your ass," to all of us. And here's the thing. He's right. He could. He proved it. But there's one problem. He's also wrong. Because we travel in packs. When he would bind up one of our friends, and it was a one-on-one competition, I don't think he ever lost. But there's 6 of us big guys around. And if you guys know something about gangsters, bullies, etc., do they ever travel alone? No. So awesome in the ring, terrible on the streets. And so finally, to make a point, he's got my buddy Scapegoat all wrapped up in the mount position. He's mocking him, can't do anything. So I went over, picked up a wooden stick and started poking him right in the middle, not bruising him, but just poking him in the middle of the back and saying, "Imagine if this was a knife." And then I kind of pressed it between the shoulder blades. Imagine this is a gun, right? The problem is other people. But that's also the benefit. One of the things that it fascinates me is all the studies that demonstrate that people that feel that they're alone in a problem have a much stronger stress response than those who know other people around them have their backs. Learning to ask for help is one of the most adaptive skills we can engage in. Human beings are inherently tribal people. We mentioned the other day that the first sign of civilization isn't the wheel, it isn't fire, it's not metalworking or stone knapping. It's when we find the bones of somebody who suffered a catastrophic injury, a fractured skull, a fractured femur, a fractured pelvis, which in a hunter-gatherer society should be terminal. Instead, when we find bones that have healed, that means that somebody else took care of them. That's the first sign of civilization. Okay? So, we all need help, and there's some skills we can practice, like requesting help versus triangulating. For example, let's say, Adam, you've upset me. You've had a crucial conversation with me, and my little ego's hurt because I'm a super special princess pony snowflake. And I go over to our friend here, and I go, "That Adam's such a jerk, man." Right? That's triangulating. Because what I'm trying to do is set him against Adam. That's not helping anything. What help is, "Hey, bud, over lunch, can I kind of cry on your shoulder a little bit? I'm kind of upset with what happened between Adam and I. I know he's doing his best. I'm trying my best. But I'm still just like, it'd help me to talk out loud about and vent for a minute." That's asking for help. Okay? Where I'm not throwing Adam under all the buses. Instead, I'm acknowledging he's doing his best and asking a friend for some moral support. That's asking for help. Triangulation often makes a team fall apart. Like if you and I are pitting our other friend against this friend, now the team is full of contention. But if I go to you and say, "Man, I'm really hurt. You said something hurt my feelings, but I'm not brave enough to talk to you yet, and I come to you and you give me a hug and say, you need to talk to her about this. That's help, okay? And even giving me pointers on to how. So, the importance of consultation. One of the things that shocks me is how lonely therapists are. Because so much of what we do is confidential. And therapists are disproportionately introverts to begin with. They're disproportionately lonely because they can't really talk about work in any detail. And they tend to seek after solitude. So wherever I work, I try to set up consultation lunches where, with informed consent of the clients, we can commiserate and help each other with our cases in a confidential space and morally support each other. So for those of you that are therapists or thinking of going that route, please do the same thing. Therapist mental health on average isn't actually that great because they're often struggling and lonely. So consult. So rather than me going to you and complaining, I say, hey, can I consult with you about how to handle this situation? You notice how that feels different than, she hurt my feelings, right? And so think of it as consultation. Can I get some feedback? Can I get some advice? The other thing, and this takes a lot of bravery, it may take you a while to work up to this, and show me where they might be right if they are. Try to find people who love you enough to kick you square in the puppy, that they will be kind to you over being nice to you. Okay, those are the people you consult with. So, again, if you must choose for your own behavior, niceness or kindness, if you must choose on those rare occasions, choose kindness, but likewise seek that out in other people. I was visiting back from graduate school and talking to some friends, all the big rowdy crews getting together, having a big barbecue, we're trading notes. And a friend of mine's like, Draper, what's it been like living in Texas? And I go, it's really peaceful. They're talking about all the fights, the bar fights and everything else. And I realized that I am starting to master the skill of not going where the fights are. Now, there's a geographic skill of not going where the fights are. Like if you're going to bars a lot and they're rowdy bars, the fights are more likely to happen there. So you're not going to bars or rowdy bars, you're less likely to get in a fight. But there's also don't go where the fights are internally. Grandma called it visiting trouble. Like I'd be sitting and stewing, like Grandpa'd sharply redirect me, because again, I work very slowly. So Grandpa comes in, he sharply redirects me, and I'm up, having lunch and eating my little peanut butter and jelly sandwich and grumbling, crying. And Grandma's like, what's going on? It's Grandpa's in. She says, son, you're visiting trouble. Grandpa's not here. He's just frustrated. Don't go to where the trouble is in your soul. When you start visiting trouble, what upsets you, remind yourself that you're going there to visit and own it. Yep, I'm visiting trouble. Look at me go. Okay? That slight distance that little slight distance that Grandma taught me about is what psychologists today call cognitive diffusion. Just taking a step back and acknowledging and being aware of your process and what you're doing. Get the ego out of the way. Is it me or them? It's likely both. To what degree? Is their feedback valid and to what degree? Take what feedback you can. Like again, that professor many years ago saying you're the biggest, most monstrous person I've ever met. That was important her delivery, yes, could have been better and more helpful, but that was important for me to hear. It has complicated my clinical life. So I compensate by being very, very soft, very warm. Like if you guys were to see my office, it's very homey, it's full of fluffy blankets, on the couch where the clients sit, right? I'm in my big lazy boy. But it's like very warm tones, et cetera, to compensate for the fact that it's very rare I meet a client my size. So discard the rest. Her saying that I'm hostile, I'm not. That was unhelpful. And then try to do so graciously. As I started to get to know this professor, she did not share details, but there had been certain assault experiences happen for her in high school that really colored her vision and view of men, particularly large men. Again, she didn't share details. And that it was an act of bravery for her to ask me to be her teaching assistant because it was stressful for her to have me in the room. So, endeavor grace. Few people will share those details for you. It will do your heart good and your relationships good to assume that those details are there, even if you don't know specifically what they are. Everybody's got details. Now, boundaries. I want to cover this because this is a pet peeve of mine. Too often in the TikTokos and the Facebooks and the Instagramatons and things like that, people talk about boundaries in a very hostile and exclusive way. They're misusing the term. Boundaries are where you and I connect And boundaries are what maintains our relationship. It's not, this is my boundary, screw you, I'm never going on a date with you again. No, that's not what a boundary is. Boundaries are first of all articulated, right? You all have boundaries with your employer and they have it with you in the form of your employee handbook, right? Your employment agreement, that's the boundary. And they'll even specify, here are the violations and here's how you talk to HR about it, right? There are boundaries there. We have a boundary with Canada. That is how we relate to Canada, is across that boundary. We have a boundary with Mexico. That's how we relate to Mexico. It's how Utah relates to Nevada, Arizona, Idaho, etc. Okay? Boundaries are where we touch. It's where we connect. So this is the space that maintains the relationship. It requires mutual participation, clear articulation, and it's about personal behavior, not about the other. I do not have boundaries that control your behavior. If I do, I'm being controlling. I'm not exercising a boundary. A boundary is what I do. Okay? A boundary is what I do. For example, a friend of mine went on a date not too long ago, and adult dating is weird. And so she goes on a date, and through I can't remember which dating service she was using, if it was like Bumble or Hinge or something like that, but she had articulated, getting to know this guy by text message, that she is very sensitive to objectification, meaning being made into a sex object. And he agreed, he says, yes, women these days are really put through it. So she puts on this beautiful skirt and blouse, one of those flouncy, bouncy skirts. She meets with him at a cafe, and the first thing he does is stand up and goes, stop, turn around for me. She stopped, she started turning, went, wait, I've already articulated this boundary. And she said, dude, I'm not interested in having coffee with you now. What, why? I was just having fun. I told you I'm sensitive to objectification. You're welcome to do what you do, but the boundary, the border between us is now violated. I need to leave. This isn't okay, especially after I told you. But that's the secret about boundaries, is they need to be articulated, what they are and why they're there. And so oftentimes with like doing couples counseling, just having a couple start to articulate and start drawing those lines, because his boundary's here, her boundary's here, but they don't count as boundaries because they haven't been agreed upon. They've not been articulated. And so that's something important that I've done with my employees, and this was inspired by some of my better supervisors, where they'd sit down and say, okay, what are the rules of our conversations? Here's where I'm coming from, what do you bring to the table? And we'd negotiate a boundary, right? Something to do with my spouse and my kids. Okay, this is where I'm coming from, where are you coming from? So again, it's about how you respond, not about controlling their behavior. And usually boundaries request their participation. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to go over a couple of case studies. If I can get this to cooperate. My old eyes. Okay, so this is inspired by an old boss of mine. Micromanages. Okay, I would get an email from her at 4 a.m. And if I came into work at 8 a.m. and I had not responded between 4 a.m. when she sent it and 8 a.m. when I actually started work, I would be in trouble and in danger of a write-up. Okay? The best evaluation I ever got out of it was a 3 out of 5. Because 5 out of 5s are for perfect people, and there's no such thing as perfect people, so the highest I'll ever give is a 4. Okay? That's what she said, that's not what I say. Accepts no reasons for emergent issues. Like one day, I had a child with a catastrophic illness situation, and I needed to rush to the hospital. I missed a meeting, and I got a very nasty email from her and written up when I got back, because I should have thought and planned for those contingencies. Okay? I can tell some of you have had a boss like this. Okay? And then there was no empathy. Like when I sat down and tried to negotiate boundaries with her, it was not, I'm the boss, screw you, my way goes. So, she's pretty berry, she's pretty tigery, right? She has them vicious claws and fangs. What are my bears? How does this get to me? It's natural and important that it does. There's nothing wrong with me that she stresses me the bleep out, okay? So, let's practice the martial art. Wax on, wax off. Let me understand you, if I understand you correctly. Getting my ego out of the way. Because if she's this way, is that actually about me at all? No. Now I'm managing her. She thinks she's managing me, and I don't mean this like in an ego-driven way. I mean in terms of actually getting the meeting done, I'm now having to manage her. Okay? Polite, polite, polite. Civility in the face of incivility. Before she would meet with me, I would be breathing in my office. I would be doing all these centering exercises, vasovagal. There's a whole bunch of techniques we didn't have time to go over today. I would still be nervous getting into her office. I would be using those techniques and look, why do you have that weird expression on your face? I'm tightening my sphincters. I didn't tell her that part, right? But, and then before, during, and after, trying to come down. And so, excuse me, I ended up leaving that job after a couple years of that. Even though I loved the rest of the job, could not abide the management. In fact, I'll never forget the day she resigned. She was shocked and appalled. I'm like, you're surprised? You've lost half your faculty. Okay. Now, do you all still collaborate with Dan W. Peterson School down the hill? A few of you do a little bit. So for a year, I worked at Dan W. Peterson late in high school, and I was one of the gym teachers. And one of my students, he has unfortunately since passed away, was named Lonnie. Lonnie had an inch on me. Like, I'm 6'6", he was 6'7", he was a big boy. And he was minimally verbal, but there would be outbursts of obscenity. Motherfucker, just like the word he knew best was the F word, okay? He was physically violent. If he started getting frustrated, he would throw hands, and that boy could hit. He would push boundaries. Like, as you try to read, Lonnie, we're playing this game now, come on, and he would walk the other way, because he knew very few people were strong enough to pull him back. And if they did pull him back, he got to throw hands. He was rarely happy, rarely smiling. And I dreaded working with Lonnie. So if you're nice, he turns away from you. If you're kind, he turns away from you. Nothing got through to this kid. So after about 6 weeks, I went to the teacher, not the aide gym teacher, which as a high school student, but instead to the actual like trained special ed gym teacher. And don't make me work with Lonnie. And she's like, he responds better to you than anybody else. I'm like, really? I've still got bruises on my ribs. And she goes, yeah, he responds better to you. And I said, I can't work with him. I'm just exhausted. I dread coming here. I want to quit this job. And she says, let me tell you a story. When Lonnie was 10, he was running across the street in Salt Lake after his older brother, who was 12 at the time, and Lonnie got hit by a bus. Lonnie was in the gifted and talented program in school. Lonnie remembers what it's like to be smart, and he can't get his body and brain to cooperate. He lives in that constant state of frustration because now nobody talks to him because he has a hard time with words. Nobody will play with him because he gets easily frustrated and lashes out. But imagine that version of locked-in syndrome. So you guys are familiar with locked-in syndrome from Metallica's epic song called One, where it's a World War I veteran who gets shrapnel that severs the relationship between his brain and his body. So his brain is okay, but he can't move or feel his body at all. He can't speak. He can hear, he can see, but he can't even move his eyes very well. And so that's locked-in syndrome. Well, this is a version of it where he remembers what it's like and he's locked into this body where his brain won't cooperate and his body won't cooperate. And so locked in with memory of normalcy. When we know why somebody behaves the way they do, we can better handle what they do. You know that old adage? A human being can survive any what if they have a sufficiently powerful why. Why do you come to work? Because that'll allow you to handle the whatever happens here, if it's a powerful enough why. So, with Lonnie, I started practicing balancing nice and kind. And the more I would hold his firm behavior, not give in to his aggression, we experience what's called an extinction burst or an extinction scream. This is where, before somebody's habit changes, it gets really, really intense. Okay? The cravings are the worst before you finally kick the habit. Right? Our whole society is going through an extinction scream right now, or an extinction burst, where the rates of incivility are the highest they've been in 100 years. And so just that things are changing, and so everybody's really upset because all of our habits are being threatened. So, and then abiding the process, and it was hard. So the parasympathetic nervous system activation, doing my breathing from my martial arts classes, doing the grounding exercises, trying to dodge Lonnie's, I'm slow on my feet, so I wasn't always successful. And then again, continually asking for help. I thought that because Lonnie was assigned to me, I was the only one that would then help Lonnie. I started hollering out, like if things were calm, like Janine, for example, was really, really good at her job. She'd get her kids playing, because these were teenagers, and then I'd say, hey Janine, can I get your hand? Can I get your help? Like how can we best help Lonnie here? And then when I stopped throwing Lonnie under all the buses and treating him, hey, this is somebody worthy of time and attention. This is somebody with whom I'd like to consult. She and I teamed up, and that was far more helpful for Lonnie. And so did Lonnie become a nice little angel baby who was so compliant? And I'd like to tell you fairies came out of his butt and he grew a unicorn horn. No, Lonnie remained difficult to work with, but we could work with him. Okay? And so we got out of our own way to help him not get in his way as much. Okay, so I'm actually a little over time. Thank you very much for abiding with me today. I do appreciate your company. I know some of you have somewhere to be. Go ahead and go. I'm going to sit here for a few minutes and answer questions if you have any.